Welcome to the Kyndryl-sponsored session. What we're going to do in this session is walk you through Kyndryl's view of how you should set about doing mainframe modernization in, I guess, the mid-2020s, and also some exciting announcements that we're pleased to do in partnership with AWS. So sit back, enjoy, and between the three of us over the next 45 minutes or so, we will take you through this little journey. We're going to do Q&A at the end, so save them up until then. So what we're going to talk about here, we're going to give you a little bit of view of how the market is sitting today, what the expectations of customers are that we're talking to, what we would expect them to come forward in terms of what they're planning to do around mainframe modernization. We're then going to talk a little bit about what those patterns of modernization look like and how AWS can play a significant role in the mainframe modernization that you set about doing. And then we'll get into the announcements and the new capabilities that Kyndryl is announcing today. And then obviously we'll wrap up. So the first thing, mainframes are going to be here for a long time. They are very resilient. The results that you see in the middle here, there's a link in the bottom right-hand corner to an independent survey that Kyndryl had done earlier this year, and we released the results in September. 90% of the respondents, and it was about 500 odd respondents, and they weren't all Kyndryl customers. About 90% of them said, mainframes are in our business. They're going to stay here for the foreseeable future. However, 95% of them said we are going to move some workloads off. Few of them said we're going to move it all off, but a lot of them said, we're moving into a hybrid world where the mainframe is going to be here, and a hyperscaler, AWS in this instance, is going to be the part of the hybrid cloud solution that we put together here. And those that were choosing to move workload off, they said, on average, 37% of our workloads are going to move off. So this sort of fits the Kyndryl model that we'll touch on a little bit later about the right platform for the right workload. And in a hybrid cloud world, you're going to have to decide where you put your applications, how you may split them, etc. So why are people setting about doing this modernization that we're talking about? About 50% of them are on data access. You've seen all the announcements this week around generative AI and the need for data, the need to look at data in different ways. So a lot of people saying, look, I've got the crown jewels of my business sit on the mainframe in a variety of different mainframe data sources. I want to open up that data, bring it into a new environment, play around with it, do things with it. Some will say, no, I just want to leave the data on the mainframe, but I want to access it from an AWS environment. But I got to do it. All of my business data is sitting there. 48% want improved innovation. What can I do differently in an AWS environment? Can I do new innovative things on the mainframe itself? How do I bring those two worlds together to address current business needs and future business needs that I might have? And last one, improved flexibility. I want to decide where I put my applications, how I split my applications across the platforms. Where do I move the data to? Back to the data accessibility point. I want flexibility in what I'm going to do. And then those who have already started to modernize, what were they kind of seeing as the results of doing it? On average, people were seeing sort of $25 million worth of savings. Those that were doing what we call modernize with or move off, we're seeing an 11% improvement in profit. And those that were doing a modernize on, so literally just modernizing their mainframe environment, we're seeing a 9% improvement in profit. But as you can see, the end results are positive improvement for any company doing any form of modernization. So what are those kinds of modernization that they're doing? And we've touched on them a little bit in the first couple of slides. And interestingly, it's about a third split between modernizing on the platform, doing integration between mainframe and AWS, and also the amount of people who are actually going to move stuff off is, once again, about a third. And these are the three patterns that we talk about, and I will say the integrate with pattern in the middle can be attached to a modernize on. People start to do modernization on the platform, then go, oh, if I do this in addition, I can now start to access applications, access data from an AWS platform, so they'll then drift into the integrate with. And in many instances, a move off starts with an integrate with. Because moving off, certainly from what we're seeing with customers, it's a complex thing to do. It's not impossible, as many people have demonstrated, but it is very complex. And so people want to see early results from having started to move down the cloud path. So even those who are doing a move off pattern will start with an integrate with. They'll build some new AWS apps, maybe access existing applications and data. So even a move off pattern for a customer can start with an integrate with. So in the AWS environment, what are we talking about doing here? We're talking about embracing and adopting the AWS Mainframe Modernization service, or the M2 platform, goes under a couple of different short names. So why are they doing this? What are they looking to gain benefit from as they integrate their mainframe environment with AWS, or the AWS Mainframe Modernization service? First one is application platform engineering. So this is integrated DevSecOps between the AWS world and all the AWS tools that you have, and the tools that you can also use to do integrated DevSecOps with the mainframe. So they're looking for increased agility. Their application developers can start to adopt the same processes, some of the same tools, etc. But once again, it's helping to improve agility. Data integration and AI, obviously we touched on this a couple of minutes ago. They're looking to open up all their different data sources. And for those of you that are not from a mainframe environment in the audience, we're not just talking about relational data sitting inside DB2, for example. You've got data sources that go back 20, 30, 40 years that are still sitting there doing stuff with a lot of data in that people want to gain access to. And lastly, they're looking to move off. Right? They're looking to take some of the applications that no longer make sense to be in the mainframe environment, maybe refactoring them or replatforming and moving into an AWS mainframe modernization environment. So these, all of these services you can gain from the AWS M2 platform. So first thing that Kyndryl is very pleased to announce is that alongside the other key partners in the AWS M2 platform, Kyndryl has been tapped as the first managed service partner to join the M2 platform. What this actually means is that Kyndryl brings its considerable depth and breadth of experience in the mainframe environment. We have about 8,000 odd engineers with an average age of about 36 or 37. We run somewhere in the order of 6.5 million MIPS under management. So it's a huge enterprise that we have in terms of being able to manage the mainframe environment. And we're marrying that with the skills and capabilities that AWS bring to the table with the AWS M2 platform. So we're marrying these two together with Kyndryl as a managed service provider to help customers who are going down this path of being able to modernize on, integrate with, move off with AWS in a mainframe environment, and between the Kyndryl skills and the AWS technology and capabilities, we believe this will be a good partnership for any customer wanting to embark on this journey. So we're now going to move on to the next section, which gets into some more of the technical sides of the announcements that we're going to make. So I'll pass it over to Anthony to carry on.
Thank you, Richard. Can you guys hear me? Very good. So just to recap, right, there's 3 use cases from a modernization perspective that we're talking about. Modernization on, integrate with, and move off, right? So what I will be covering moving forward is the move off case, right? So as you can see on the slide, it's deceptively simple. This is just a visualization, right? What I would like to make sure that you guys take away is 3 key main points before you embark on your modernization journey. Number 1, make sure your migration target off of mainframe is at least 1 to 3 years away. 1 to 3 years away. This is not simple, right? Number 2, right, is make sure your mainframe contract renewal is at least 2 to 4 years away, right? So make sure that that happens. And then what we found out is it makes a lot of sense if the spend is more than $1 million on your mainframe per year, right? If you're spending more than $1 million, it makes sense to move that off of the mainframe. So those are the 3 critical points I want to mention before I dig into the presentation. So from a journey perspective, modernization journey perspective, there's 5 steps, starting off with analyze, right? In the analyze phase, what you have to do is you have to look at the application portfolio of your mainframe. It can be COBOL or PL1. Not just one application, but the whole application portfolio. This will enable you to start understanding the prioritization based on pain versus gain. And the way that you come around that pain versus gain is to understand the business value, the agility that it brings, and the complexity, the feasibility. Those are the 3 criteria that you got to evaluate to understand the pain versus gain. Once you have that, then you need to understand, do the thorough analysis using Blue Edge Insights from AWS. That's an AWS modernization service. We use it also. And Eric here will walk us through a little bit of a deep dive on that. But use that to understand the dependencies of the COBOL application. If you look at most of the mainframe applications, they're very tightly coupled, right? They're very tightly coupled between each of the modules, right? So you need to understand those dependencies and also the data dependencies, right? And how the data is. Once you have a clear understanding of that, you got to embark on a POC, right? The projects that actually took the whole mainframe modernization in one swath, only 6% of them were successful, right? So you got to start off with a POC, right? In the POC, and the POC, so the reason why we serialize this is to make it simple to look at. But this is an iterative chart, right? You start off with the POC, go through the 5 steps, then go back to what's the next COBOL or PL1 application, go through these 5 steps again. That's how you start layering your modernization journey, not taking and increase the probability of success. So we're back at square one, analyze. Once you analyze, you have 2 patterns to transform from a migration perspective. One is refactor, right? And the second is replatform. So in refactor, that's where you get the most modernization, right? And when you look at modernization, starts off with infra modernization, data modernization, app modernization, and process modernization, right? The operating system is operating, how you operate it when you move off in a cloud-native way changes, right? So in a refactor, the infra modernization happens when you move from the mainframe hardware to M2 hardware, right? Data modernization happens when you move off of DB2, vSAM, IMS, those hierarchical databases, to Aurora or Amazon RDS, right? Then the application modernization happens when you move out from COBOL to Java, right, or .NET. And also from an operational modernization, what happens is now you can embark on cloud ops. You can manage your app in a very cloud-native way using all the innovation that AWS has provided, from CloudWatch all the way to their DevSecOps tools, right? From AWS Cloud Build, Cloud Commit, and the like, right? So that is what? Refactor. So from a refactor perspective, you get the most modernization, excuse me. The second pattern that I talked about is replatform. From a replatform perspective, what happens is you actually get infrastructure modernization, but then you emulate the runtime using Micro Focus, right? And this is where it's almost a lift and shift. There's no recoding of the application. So it's mostly a lift and shift that happens in refactor. So to recap, two migration patterns, refactor and replatform. Refactor has the most modernization. Then you start developing. Breaking out your application into macro services. I know this is not native to cloud. There's also a macro service and a microservice. The reason why you want to look at macro services is it's speed at which you can do a POC, right? So it's more coarse-grained than a microservice, right? So you got those options, and you develop that, and then you test it and deploy it and operate it, right? And when you do all this, what happens is now you have access to a CI/CD pipeline process, DevSecOps. You can also include that. So you're modernizing the process piece of it. So to bring all this together, this was simple from a process step perspective, but we had to pull in a lot of tools, platforms, services, starting off with deploy and operate. If you look at deploy and operate, we bring in our service called Kyndryl Cloud Native Services, right? In Kyndryl Cloud Native Services, we actually have built in 3 innovations that I'll talk to you about in the coming slides. Now, the other one is we partnered with AWS, and we have this factory for AWS Refactor that actually uses and accelerates all the tooling and innovation that Blue Edge has provided, along with the best practices that we provide as part of the 61% MIPS that we manage in the market, right? And last but not least, we also use AWS data replication with precisely to really accelerate and making sure that the data is migrated, moved across the environments. Good. You guys with me so far? Just a show of hands, right? How many of you have mainframes in your organization? Very good. Thank you. Now, number 2 question, how many are you guys planning to migrate off of mainframe? Some of them. Okay. Remember this. Booth 980. Go hit booth 980. We'd love to help you, okay? And make sure that you have successful outcomes. Okay, moving on. So the Kyndryl's technology accelerators that we actually launched that we have as part of our portfolio is a service, the Kyndryl Cloud Native service that comes with foundational services that gives you the consult, implement, and manage around landing zone designs, right, as well as infrastructure designs that you are required to make sure that you follow the cloud adoption framework of AWS, right? The second one, which is Kyndryl Bridge, that is the platform that we provide to give our clients an integrated experience across their IT footprint. It's not just cloud. the clients that we manage have on-prem, they have multi-cloud. So Kyndryl Bridge gives that facility by providing observability across all these footprints. From an AI ops perspective, we have our AI ops that have patents and also patents around ML models on how to correlate all the events and monitors to give you actionable insights, right? And last but not least, which is new as part of this announcement, is the resource manager for Kyndryl, right? RM4K, that we have integrated with the M2 service. When the M2 service gets deployed, this gets deployed to keep monitoring the health of the application and the whole stack, and it enables the integration into Kyndryl Bridge. So 3 accelerators: the service, the platform, and the resource manager, which sits on M2. Good. Let's move on. And the 4 new capabilities that we released is Kyndryl Cloud Native Services for AWS Mainframe Modernization, DevSecOps with AWS Replatform, Factory for AWS Refactor, and AWS Data Replication with Precisely. Right? What I will do is I will cover KCNS for AWS Mainframe Modernization Service, and the other 3 will be covered by Eric. So I'm really excited I actually created this service with my team, and we bought 3 innovations as part of this service. One is from a tooling perspective. If you look at traditional MSPs, they have tools that they use to manage the customer's workloads that actually they deploy as part of their managed service. What we have done, we took that out. We do not use any third-party tools to manage our customers' services, our customers' workloads. We use AWS native services to do that. What that does is, number 1, onboarding time reduces drastically from months to days. At one customer, it was an outlier, but it was 15 minutes, right? Number 2, right, is if you look at from a client perspective, their time to revenue significantly increases. Number 3, a lot of clients are really conscious about their sustainability goals, right? By taking out that extra third-party tools and infrastructure, we have significantly reduced the carbon footprint of managed workloads, right? But last but not least, cost. We also have reduced the cost by at least 20 to 30%. Why? Because clients don't have to pay for the third-party tools to monitor and manage their workloads. You guys with me? Make sense? Good. So, and that is the service that we have introduced, and that's innovation number 1, tools. Innovation number 2 is delivery model, right? The delivery model, we went from a waterfall ITIL siloed storage admin, network admin, server admin type of management style, delivery style, to squad-based, SRE-based, site reliability engineer-based, that is backed up and understands the whole stack, not just one silo of the stack. So, and the way that we actually do our management is through DevSecOps principles and deploying infrastructure as code, integrating our deployment practices and delivery practices into the DevSecOps processes of our customers, right? So that it actually, the provisioning time of the infrastructure is seamless because it's integrated into the DevSecOps pipelines. So that's the second innovation. The third innovation that we did was in pricing, right? From a pricing perspective, we were RU-based, resource unit-based. Any customer here that has an outsourcer understands what resource unit-based is. It's a fixed scope, monthly charge. There's ups and downs on it. that we charge, right? What we've done there is we have modified that, and we made it percentage-based pricing based on how much the client consumes of the hyperscaler spend, right? So you guys we don't have to understand what you're going to spend upfront. You spend, you go up, you go down, we charge by that, okay? With that, what I want to do is I want to pass the baton to my colleague here, Eric, to walk us through the other 3 accelerators.
All right. Thanks, Anthony.
Welcome.
All right. So we've sort of got the moving parts laid out a little bit now. And now we need to kind of figure out how to bring this all together. And so the factory that we announced and the capabilities that kind of come with it, think about it as, okay, Anthony talked about doing a POC and so forth, and then he talked about, okay, the landing zone is going to look like this, and he talked about the tools are over here. Okay, now we need a project that's going to get all of that kind of organized, right? And so AWS has a factory notion, and we're going to instantiate that. We're going to bring that to life and bring the skills and experiences that go with that. The mainframe modernization service, once you get things to the runtime, is good. The tools that are in it are good. That makes it easy to provision quickly all of these different kinds of environments. But how do we use them? How do we build those wave plans after we've established what we can do? How do we put the sequencing and dependencies? How do we think about the data? Okay, there's a number of techniques that you can apply there. You maybe leave the data where it is for a while, maybe move some of it. These are complicated things based on our experiences, and so we help kind of set up the factory to do those kinds of things, right? And so it's really all about instantiating this and then looking at it end to end and holistically during that period from we've decided we're going to move off, and we've decided we're going to use Blue Age, and we're going to generate the Java. The POC said that's going to work, fine. Now, how do we get there? How do we get there from here and make it happen? Now, one of the other things that will come with this as part of leveraging our experience is, the code artifacts that we can run the tools on and so forth. That's all good. But because we run mainframes all the time, we know that there's some hidden value coming out of that mainframe. There may be utilities there that are doing all kinds of interesting printing and so forth. And if you go down and look at some of the batch jobs, we can convert the batch jobs. But what about the things they call, right? And so one of the things that I know we've learned over the past couple of years of working in this space is it's great to talk about the code artifacts and have a good factory to go with them, but you need to also think about kind of the rest of what's there. And that's important in the beginning, and it's even more important if you're going to try to move almost everything off, right? And what we've found is this is another great opportunity to leverage the AWS platform because they've got solutions to a lot of those things, but you have to kind of know that this old mainframe tool, that actually can be replaced by something over in AWS. And only experience and you build up that list is kind of part of what we can bring to bear here from a factory perspective. So that's part of what is shown here as we look at the rest of the value that we bring. It's really about that expertise. It's really about enabling and getting the KCNS set up. And then the other part that we will bring in is, again, that broader Kyndryl perspective where, it's great, we've got the KCNS part, that'll take care of the Java that we've converted, but wait a minute, there's actually a mobile app also running over here in AWS, so we need to stitch that together from a observability perspective. We'll use those AWS tools, but we need to think about how that all correlates and how we look at that. And so a thing I always tell customers is that from a Kyndryl perspective, we're always worried about day 2, 3, 4, and beyond. And so we bring up a lot of these questions and we help out on those kinds of things right up front as we're executing the transformation. So that's kind of the factory notion. It's the end-to-end idea that we have as part of this announcement. Now, the DevSecOps part, again, there's capabilities within the mainframe modernization service that we can take advantage of. But this one's kind of complicated in terms of the fact that it supports multiple scenarios, right? And so the first scenario is really that of leveraging AWS as a platform to do CI/CD and to do things even if you're still targeting the mainframe. And so this leverages the OpenText / Micro Focus, et cetera, capabilities that are in the mainframe modernization service. This will help you look at your COBOL and other mainframe code and ask yourself, am I really getting the speed and the agility in its current form? Maybe I should start with some modernization there, and we might bucket that under our modernize on kind of capabilities. But there's a lot of value to be gotten there. You can improve the velocity, and you can improve the, I can click through here and start to show some of those benefits, one of which is also kind of the cost, right? You can keep the mainframe MIPS utilization down by doing some of those tests in a mainframe modernization service runtime that's running on AWS. But then finally, when you go into production, you'll drive it through and have it running in the COBOL runtime, for example, that you're running it in today. So that all sounds a little bit complicated. And so some of the accelerators and the expertise that we bring to bear as part of this capability are really going to jumpstart you in doing that. Now, how does that relate back to full move-off modernization? Well, we find often that there are things that you need to think about in your applications that you could take care of right now, right? Anthony talked about sometimes you go back to analyze and you actually fix the COBOL before you convert it to Java, right? And so this is not, it's not a sequential process like he said, right? I mean, if you use the Blue Age tools and you go through and you realize, wow, if I just fix this COBOL here, that would clean up this thing coming out the other end. And so by getting to a modern DevOps model, by using the AWS capabilities around development tools and using things like Git to put the source in, you're moving to a place where your developers are going to be more ready, but you're also going to be getting those code assets more ready for what ultimately is the modernization. So underneath of this, there's a bunch more details we don't have time to talk about with sample pipelines and how this all fits together. And so our teams have been working with this. We've been working with AWS since kind of the beginning of the mainframe modernization service. And so we're kind of ready to go at it on real projects with you in this particular area. Now, the other thing here is that we can also plug some of this into our bridge, and so that you can kind of get that visibility over what's going on, right? Because if you think back to the factory, you might have multiple of these things going on, and you're going to want to have kind of visibility into the DevOps activity that's going on. And so we use this bridge as an aggregation mechanism for you and for us, again, depending on where we're helping you in this journey to see what's going on. Okay, so that is the quick view over what we're doing with the replatform. But the important thing is there's kind of two sub-scenarios, right? The first of which targets the mainframe, but in a much more modern way. The second of which then really supports when you do use the Blue Age path, okay? And the Micro Focus part of it as well. And when you talk about mainframe modernization service, there are those two capabilities. All right. So the other use case that was mentioned earlier, deals with data replication. And here, again, this is one of these tools that has multiple subcases that you can support. And so, first and foremost, you will need, as part of running the factory, you will need to figure out, are you going to move the data? Are you going to copy the data? What's going to happen there? And so you can kind of get some value from this particular capability in that case. But perhaps the more interesting cases are, I'm leaving this data on the mainframe for a long, long time, but it's been a little bit problematic to get at the data that I want for the new capabilities that I'm trying to do out on AWS. And so you're sitting here with a powerful AWS environment, and you're sitting over there with some really good data. Now, how do we quickly get this going? And so I think about this in terms of two kinds of use cases. One, which is more of a bulk move that is going to establish a place where you can start doing analytics and AI and so forth. And we need to say AI a couple of times, but AI starts with good data, right? And this technology combined with our skills around how to leverage it are going to accelerate that for you. It's not the glitzy part of AI, but if you don't have good data, we all know that is going to make your results not so valuable. The second case, which gets much more into what I would call traditional applications that are doing getting information a few rows at a time or a few objects at a time, that's also an important use case that we support here, right? Because you can set up this pipeline using the precisely capabilities that are part of mainframe modernization service and get quote, quote, near real time. Now, some of you will want to argue with me about what does that mean. Are we talking milliseconds or are we talking a few seconds and so forth? But what we find is that everybody needs some of that, right? And actually, if you look at things architecturally, I find that without leveraging these kinds of capabilities, you get all kinds of interesting architecture anomalies, right? I mean, I look at applications all the time that have mobile front ends, they have middle tiers, and then, the real data is back there on the mainframe. And if you don't have something like this, there'll be some bright developers that start putting caches way out near the mobile app, and then the security guy or gal figures out that that's happening, and you end up spending a lot more money to kind of moderate all of that. By having a capability like this, you get yourself architecturally cleaner, and there's a lot of architect in me, and I like what we can do with this from that perspective. But the thing I would tell you about this and where the Kyndryl value is going to come in is there gets to be a pipeline that makes this happen, right? And somebody's got to watch that. Somebody's got to care and feed for that as you go forward over time, because you're going to be in this situation for possibly many years based on some of the survey data that Richard talked about earlier. So this isn't kind of the straw house. You need to build this, in a much more solid and sustainable long-term kind of way. And so we think that with our skills and accelerators and these capabilities, we've got a pretty good match here, right? Now, the whole notion of moving or copying this data off also comes with some other side effects, which can be, reducing the MIPS that you're consuming. Because if you have less people coming in and doing those read transactions, for example, that's going to reduce the MIPS. The other part about these kinds of technologies, and this one in particular, is it kind of takes you from what we would have classically talked about over the years from an ETL to more of an ELT, where you're doing the transformation of some of those data sources on the cloud, where we've got tools to do that and so forth. And so for those of you that are counting MIPS, right, that's another possible savings point along the way. So with all of these, there are kind of the agility, speed, and velocity kind of benefits, but then there's also kind of the financial realities of this. And again, some of you might be as focused on those as you are on the technical elements. So I kind of bring that up as kind of a final thought here. So with that, I think we hand it back to Richard, or back to Anthony.
Yeah, thank you.
All right?
Yep. Yeah. So let's, I know we've covered a lot of things, right, in terms of accelerators, in terms of new capabilities, right? So what I'd like to do, I'd like to bring all of this back together from a client journey perspective, right? So the first thing that they've got to do from a client perspective is to provision the environment, to provision the M2 environment, so that you have a platform. So that's the number one, provisioning of AWS resources. Then on top of that, once you do that, you got to build and deploy those applications. Then you have to operate those applications, you have to monitor, and then you have to have the right insights that have the right correlation to actually optimize the performance of the application and the cost metrics of the application. Right? So pretty much these are the tasks at a high level that the journey entails. And what I want to do now is then map this to all the accelerators that we talked about, right? So the provisioning of AWS resources, we do it with Kyndryl Bridge plus KCNS. Kyndryl Bridge acts like the service catalog where the developers can come and click on that entry to deploy it. Now, what that does is it ensures compliance and security, because you can infuse all those policies in the service catalog for that service, right? That provisioning service. And again, KCNS securely deploys it on the AWS platform. And then you have DevSecOps and AWS Blue Age that helps build and deploy. In the DevSecOps, right, not only do we use the services of AWS, but our value add is we correlate all these insights and bring it into Bridge from a dashboard perspective, right? And in that, we have an asset called DevOps Intelligence, where we actually monitor all the DORA metrics that is required and beyond, from a developer productivity perspective, as well as from a change management perspective, and how your CI/CD pipelines are actually working, right? From an operate perspective, we have the RM4K that's deployed with M2 and KCNS that actually helps manage it from a data perspective, and the like from a monitor. And from an insights perspective, I've already talked about Kyndryl Bridge. So with that, we really look forward to actually having you at the Experience Center. We have actually demos that we can walk you through, right, to get you that experience. And hopefully, we can actually help you accelerate your modernization journey. With that, let me pass the baton back to Richard.
Thank you. All right, folks. So my two esteemed colleagues here have walked you through, I'm going to say a very quick flyby of the stuff that we've announced today and have previously announced in various instances, like the base services in KCNS. There's a lot of other pieces in here that we have not talked about just because we don't have the time to do it. But suffice to say that the set of services that we have here on the slide here are just part of the journey that you will go on. Doesn't matter what kind of mainframe transformation you're going to go on, whether it is a modernize on, an integrate with, a move off. The Kyndryl set of services can cover all of those. So Kyndryl Bridge, for example, that Anthony referenced, that sits at the back for us in Kyndryl. There's bridge connections to the mainframe. So when we talk about an integrate with story that involves KCNS and Bridge in the AWS environment, Kyndryl Bridge is still watching what's happening on the mainframe side. So with data, with Eric's references around data replication, we can watch both sides at the same time and take automated actions to manage and drive what happens. So your mainframe modernization journey, doesn't matter whether it's an on, with, or off, can be monitored and handled safely and securely with the skills and experience that Kyndryl has with the environments that we manage today, not only the mainframe ones, but clearly the AWS ones as well. And there was also reference to Eric referenced the mid-tier, the other stuff that also sits there. This same capabilities that we've talked about here can be extended into that environment as well. So implementation of any of these journeys, I think we said it a couple of times here, it's complex. It's not easy. And I know I saw a show of hands here. There are some people who have already started to embark on some of these journeys. It's not easy, right? The number of times I come across a customer that I talk to and they say, oh, don't worry, it's just some COBOL and DB2 that we're going to move off. And about 2 weeks into the assessment, you sit down with the customer and you say, this COBOL is doing a remarkably good job of masquerading as assembler. And the customer goes, well, there might be some of that assembler in there. And then you find, as you go through moving the processes over to what Eric was referencing earlier, customers, you go through the process and you say, well, there's these Kix COBOL applications that are running, and then somewhere in the middle of this thing, it calls Fred's exec. What does Fred's exec do? And they go, can we talk to Fred? And you get shuffling of feet, and they say, well, Fred isn't here anymore, right? So all of these things just add up to the complexity of what you have to go through in any of these modernization scenarios. And as I said, Kyndryl with AWS, we are two of the biggest players in this space, and the combination of the two, we think will actually help you be successful in the journeys that you undertake. We have referenced it before. Come visit us at the booth in the Expo 980. And it does actually look like that picture up there, so that's not bad. Or equally, come and find us in the Kyndryl Experience Center, which is in the Venetian in Bellini 2002. We'll be happy to have a chat with you, as Anthony said, and walk you through some of the demos of some of this stuff in a little more detail. And it would be remiss of me at the very end here not to say, thank you very much on behalf of the three of us and Kyndryl for showing up. And can we also ask you to complete your session surveys as well. We'll take questions now. Three of us will be here, whichever way you want to do it. If anybody has any questions for general consumption. If not, we'll wrap here. Three of us will be here, happy to chat to you through the end of the session. Wish you a good rest of conference and safe journeys home to all of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.